Thank you. So, my name is Artur Foxander. I'm a founder of a sort of cool company, but I'm working for Mojang right now, just so you guys know. I should start with saying that I have been a programmer for less than a year. It wasn't anything for me. I have deepest respect for you guys because you can actually survive programming. I couldn't. I became a tester instead, and this is what this talk will be about. I should also just say that this applies for C++, but this is my basic thinking, like how you can test generally. So it does apply to other systems as well. And we'll start with background on purpose, how we're testing. How can we use this information, and an example of how can it be used, and of course we'll end with some questions. Let me give you guys a little bit of background, but before I do, I would just like to hear how many of you would say that you're gamers, as in if you guys are playing computer games or any kind of games on regular basis. Hands up. Oh my God, there are so many of you. I'm so happy. I'm so happy because most of my examples are from games. I'm from the gaming industry. I will try to make it relevant for everybody, but most of my examples are about games. So this entire talk, it started with me trying to do ISTQB. It's a software course. I hated it. It did not give me that much, to be honest. But there were a couple of things that I really loved about ISTQB. And the thing I liked the most is that there were some principles of testing. So I started that. I told the principles of testing to my team. And I was hoping, can we improve the testing by applying the 10 principles? We couldn't. It was a failure. So I moved on to a conference many years later, I moved on to a conference when I talked about certain things. And afterwards, after I've been speaking at this conference, somebody approached me and said, you know, Arthur, you did a good talk, but I think you're setting the bar way too low. I think because you have been talking how you have been testing and all the tests and stuff like that, but what we should be doing is we should be preventing bugs from happening. That's where we should put our energy, because if we prevent bugs from happening at all to begin with, it will be a lot cheaper for the company to begin with. So then I started thinking about that, how can we prevent bugs from happening in the first place? And then I started working at Mojang, and their approach is that quality is the responsibility of the entire team. So actually preventing bugs is part of their methodology. And this is what I would like to talk about. So this is my new take about how to prevent bugs from happening. And yeah, I'm really hoping it will help you to prevent 95%. No promises though. It kind of depends on you as well. I should just also say that this talk, I have been holding this talk for a 3 or 4 weeks course even. Now I will try to condense it into 45 minutes. I'll really try to do my best here. So, the very first advice I should give you is verification. And by verification I mean only test for the intended purpose. So if the description of a feature is that it should do this, then you test it for doing this. This is the most interesting advice because it can be done by basically anybody. And over 50% of all bugs I see in bug database can be prevented or are related to this very advice. So this is the absolutely, by far, this is the, if you do this, if you just verify that your things are working the way they're supposed to, that's the best bang for the buck advice I can give you. It's also the least interesting advice, because for most people it's kind of boring. So many people don't do this, even if it's the absolutely best advice I can give you. It's so obvious that it's very often missed. I won't give you any examples of this because it's just too simple. Let's move on to the second advice. And the second advice is to use extreme values. Whenever possible, try to test the application by entering extreme values. So what are the extreme values? Lowest possible. If possible, enter 0, empty value, nil, or null. Or you should go to the other extreme and take a highest possible value, or highest possible value plus 1. You should also be trying like out of scope values like enter strings and integer in an integer field, and Chinese characters. That's a good one. Application for English speakers. This very seldom works, to be honest. I should give you like a couple of examples. This is a game I have been playing during my spare time. Extreme values when testing inventory would be like having no items in the inventory, and items at the beginning and end of each boundary. And boundary would be like lightly encumbered, heavily encumbered, and like, so you always test at the extreme values. Also, try to enter an object when the inventory is full. So it's kind of like you already go at the full and then some, and see if something happens. When it comes to chat, and here's, I know that this is relevant for most developers, no matter if it's game or if it's software. You try to fill it with I, because I is the shortest possible character. So what happens if you just fill it with only I's? Also, you should try to fill it with uppercase W's, because they are the longest characters. So also use Å. And here's a funny thing. I tried to type in the Spanish ñ, like mañana. Apparently, I found a bug in I found bug in this in PowerPoint. It doesn't. Yeah, it wasn't working. Also, as I mentioned before, using Chinese characters. And one of my testers, one of my colleagues, did actually this. He pasted a copy of War and Peace of Leo Tolstoy into a chat. The application crashed. So it's a good way of testing, right? These are extreme, like all of those are examples of extreme values to be used. Advice number 3, synergies and combinations. And this is kind of like testing a feature. When testing a feature, think of how it affects other features. So it's this is what we usually call for integration testing. The best way of doing this is writing a list like of how can this affect, which other features can be affected at all, and just making some kind of mind map of connections, so to speak. Yeah. So case study, once again, where I'm taking the inventory in the game I was talking about. So other ways of testing around that feature of inventory would be to pick up loot, because picking up is another system. Loot management between characters, because in that case it's still inventory, but between different characters, so it kind of affects other kind of features. Encumbrance system, I will be talking about this very soon, and leveling up. And please hold that thought, because I will be talking a little bit more about this later. So the fourth advice I would give you is to check the feedback, and very specifically, really grind the numbers, so to speak. So all systems are giving you information about changes, but this advice is all about not taking that information for granted. So if we move back to previous thing, encumbrance system, we really need to calculate exactly how much encumbrance it takes, and test it, like really thoroughly check that that the system is working exactly as designed. It's kind of the same thing as verification, I should say. The reason why I have it as a separate advice is that so many testers did not check it specifically. So I needed to write it as a separate advice, a separate thing that you really should be looking for thoroughly. And the focus is on the question: do you lose trade and resources, for example? Are you informed about the changes like title, alignment, status, upgrades, whatever? So you really need to focus on being thorough about what kind of feedback are we looking for, and is this feedback actually correct? Does it affect the system the way it should? So examples of this could be the game tell you that you are encumbered. You could verify, like, is the encumbrance message showing, and you could verify it a lot. Like, if you see the damage numbers, you should be able to verify that those damage numbers are correct. I have also been playing this game called The Tainted Grail. Here you can see that you're dealing damage to some of the enemies, and the verification is about really checking that the damage does not fall under 15 or over 17. Verify the number of attacks, but also verify that if you have something that gives you 10% more damage, those damage numbers should be changed as well. So I don't know if you have heard this one before. I have hundreds of times. So a QA walks into a bar. He orders a beer. He orders 0 beers. He orders 9999 beers. He orders a lizard. He orders -1 beers. He orders a... First real customer walks in and asks where the bathroom is. The bar burst into flames, killing everybody. This is unfortunately what is happening. So, and I'm happening in the systems, not in the real life, so sorry about that. How can we prevent this? How can we prevent this very real situation from happening? The next advice is about avoiding the core path. So when it comes to the previous example, the QA walks into a bar. The very obvious thing to test would be to order something, because that's what you do at the bar, right? You order either food or you order a drink, but maybe not the toilet. And the toilet is kind of like outside of what you were supposed to do. It's kind of like a necessary thing that hangs around, but it's not necessary in a bar. And a bar owner and bartender would probably be thinking about what you can do at the bar. So the next advice is about avoiding the core path, because using the core path is faster, but most bugs are in the fields. This is also very important for project leads, because there are kind of like different definitions of core path. The actual definition is the ideal or intended player experience, progression, or sequence of events in a game. It represents the carefully designed and curated path that developers envision players following to have the most engaging and fulfilling gameplay experience. That is lots of words, right? So when project leads reads this very definition, they often think that the features that are most important in a game or in a software, right? And they usually tend to think that everything or most of the stuff is really important, right? When a tester hears exactly the same thing, they hear all features that are necessary to complete the game. And the difference is not huge, but the difference is big enough so it actually becomes a problem. So why is it important? When it comes to games, side quests, are they important for the game? Absolutely, they absolutely are for any game. But are they necessary to complete the game? They are not. Are different character classes, are they important for the game? Yes. Are they necessary? No. And here, because of this difference, when a project lead says, test the core path, they will actually think that everything is tested, everything important is tested, while the testers themselves will be thinking, like, right now I'm testing the core path, and will test the necessary features. And very often, those things are not tested properly. And that's why I kind of like wrote this advice about trying to avoid the core path. Not only focus on the necessary features, but think outside of this. So examples of things that are never part of the core path is the back buttons or cancel buttons or tooltips or other kind of clarifications. They are never ideal intended player experience. You actually move back from the path. If you try to cancel something, you move back. You're not moving toward a goal. Settings, level boundaries, and things like that. Other examples would be abilities, areas in the game, difficulty. Generally, when I talk about this, if it's a bad idea to do something, then do it. It's perfect. So the funny thing is that a couple of years ago, when I spoke about this very advice, directly afterwards, it was lunch break. So I went to McDonald's and I started ordering some. Back then this was new. The whole ordering system was very new. So I went to this thing and I just thought for myself, well, perhaps I have just talked about this advice, maybe I should test it on the ordering machine. I broke it. They had to restart it. I was so happy. The personnel at the McDonald's, they did not share my enthusiasm, but I was really happy about it. So this is a real case when I applied my own advice on something and it broke. Next advice, misuse game mechanics. So the thing is that you should be trying to understand the mechanics of the program, and when you do, try to use them in unintended ways or try to avoid using them entirely. This is all about misusing the mechanics. And so examples of this would be identifying spawn points, triggers, synergies. So you should be focusing on questions when, how, when does it happen, how does it work? And misusing, sky is the limit. There are so many ways of misunderstanding the instructions. It's really difficult to give you guys examples. I don't know. So the very first, I'm going to share two videos. The very first video is the absolutely, by far, mostly shared video ever when it comes to testing. I think I've linked to this video like 20 times at least. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen it as well. I'm going to play it now. hopefully. No, I was. Sorry. Here it is. I prepared it kind of. So this was one of the videos. I'm going to talk about it very soon. I just wanted to give you the other one, the other video as well. Right, so back to my presentation. As you can see, these are two examples of misusing the mechanics. The first one, overusing. The tester was obviously overusing a specific mechanic to solve everything. The other example was the opposite. It was to avoid the mechanics. There was a very specific mechanics that was supposed to be tested. He avoided that by pointing it in the other direction, right? So this is the this advice. This advice can also be used to test documentation. You don't actually need to have anything coded, written. Well, you have to have the written documentation, but you don't need an actual program. And the focus would be either on checking errors in the documentation, or unintended use or overusing, which we call for dominant strategy. Or perhaps there are some useless choices. So whenever I'm testing a program, a project that is very early in development, this is the advice I use the most, just so you guys know. So the funny thing is, you can even test even if something is not implemented. Last time I presented this, people were upset, so I hope you guys won't be. But in Diablo 4, there are some rogue abilities, and those two abilities are fundamental seeker, heart seeker, and primary heart seeker. You can read about them here. And this is about, so to speak, this is a game that is already implemented. I have not been involved in this game at all. However, just comparing those two and counting, like crunching numbers and looking like if they are affected or not, you could do it even if it's not implemented. This could be directly taken from the documentation, and that's kind of the point. So think a little bit for yourself, like which one would you choose of those two abilities? And then I can give you the answer. So the fundamental Heartseeker changes damage from 30.38 to 30.54, so it's a fraction. The primary Heartseeker increases damage per second from 30.38 to 53, so a whole lot more. So if you compare them one to another, they are very, very different. And just so you guys know, I would not classify this as a bug. This is obviously a design choice per definition. But if I would be working at a company and I would be crunching numbers, looking at this, comparing those two, I would definitely contact the developer and I would ask them, is this really the way you intended the game to work? And this is the problem with documentation, is that it's always by design, obviously, right? Next advice. Just so you know, there are 10 advice. I won't hold you for the entire evening. I promise that. So the 7th advice is check the order of operations. So the cause should always happen before the effect. So make sure to check it always the case. And the second part of it is to break the chain of events. So in tutorials, you're supposed to go from one place to another to the third one. So what happens if you go from the first place to the last one and then to the second? What happens if the quest giver is dead? If they have been, can you still take the quest? will the quest happen? Are you blocked or anything like that? Can you take rewards multiple times? Sometimes you do. And I know we're at Svenska Spel, so I could give you a very concrete example of this. What happens if you kind of like log out when you're supposed to receive a reward? Will you be able to receive the reward and then log in again and receive reward one more time? I don't know. I haven't tested, but I mean, this could be potentially a security threat. And so the order of operations, this very advice, you could be using it here. Right. This is a little bit too long, so I won't take this example. I can give you another example of, and this I have to show, this is how old I am. I'm taking examples from a game that looked like this, right? So, in this very game, there was a quest of taking 8 pieces of armor. Imperial armor. The thing is, by the time I got to this quest, I killed every single NPC on the entire map that had an Imperial armor. So I got this quest. I could not get past this. I was completely blocked, and there was no way of spawning new enemies. So this is kind of like an example of what could happen. Right, do you remember this slide? I was talking about inventory in Solasta, leveling up and increasing strength. And here I feel I'm kind of in a deep water because I'm going to talk about states and states interruption. And I know that you guys, programmers, know a whole lot more about states than me. So this is kind of like an explanation of how it works in games. Whenever you have a lamp, the lamp can be in 3 different states, and it can change between on and off, or the state could be broken, for example. Or if you have a potion, you can have the state of a potion being filled, and then when you use it up, it becomes destroyed. So it can change between those states. Yes?
The example on the right,
yes.
human state transitions.
Yes.
For reference for a program here, these kind of functions sometimes goes up to like 5,000 rows of code, like 5,000 lines of code. That's a small one.
Yes, yes, absolutely, I totally agree. The example you were talking about human, this was more an example that I was given to people that don't really code. And this example here, because some of the states can be combined, I'm pretty sure that you can be, for example, talking and lying down at the same time, right? So those states can be combined. However, lying down and eating, not a good thing. It can cause like a couple of bugs, start coughing and things like that, you know. Same thing as being drunk and driving. I mean, you don't try it. Please don't try it. It's a bad combination of states. So you should always be aware of which states can be combined and which states cannot be combined. I've also heard that, obviously I haven't tried myself, but being drunk and lying down, it should be able to combine those two. So when it comes to testing the states, the best example I can give is look out for animations, because animations are not state transition, but animations are often slow enough so you can interrupt. And the thing about this is trying to interrupt the state, or even maybe interrupt the process. I don't even know if the wording would be better. So this is kind of like a question for you guys. Would be easier to understand if interrupt the process. Anyway, the common ways of interrupting is, for example, to open menus, move to another area, time manipulation. So, for example, in games it's things like resting, forwarding time. If you injury or death or changes to environment. So these are the common ways of interrupting states, and usually they can lead to some really interesting errors. So for example, this game I have been playing here. The thing is, this is this is a game where you can get resources. So the small creatures in here, they can chop down forest. There are also several disasters that will happen, and you know beforehand that those disasters will happen in a couple of turns. So as you probably understand, if they happen in a couple of turns, you should be able to interrupt the process before they happen. So what happens if a thing should happen in a forest in 5 turns within a limited amount of time, and then you chop down the forest beforehand, before that happens? What will happen then? Will that forest still be affecting? In this game, this is actually a bug. So if you chop down the forest during this this disaster, the game will be, there will be a bug. The forest is the place is still considered to have a forest while it does not. So this is one way of doing this. And finally, redundancy. This is kind of like the last advice. Redundancy is doing exactly the same thing, but in a different way. So, for example, split mouse and keyboard into test either with mouse or with keyboard, or only with gamepad, or test on different browsers. Different ways of solving tests, like do exactly the same thing, but in a different way. Screen resolutions, this is a great example. This usually breaks in any software. Screen resolutions are often not working as they should. Right. There are several different fields of testing that are very similar to this. One is compatibility testing, for example, testing exactly the same thing but on different hardware, or testing on different mobile devices, or testing or cross-platform, or switching platforms mid-game. In Civilization 6, I had this kind of problem. I switched screen resolution. The red dot is where I had my mouse cursor, and I still get the tooltip that belongs to a specific button. So obviously it's kind of like outside of the button, and it's way better now than it was when the game was released. But still, I could find this bug in the game when I swapped screen resolutions. So this is an example. And finally, the last one, which is clustering. This is one like an odd one out. Because there is basically no real connection between this specific advice and a specific bug. But the general advice here is, if you find the bug, dig deeper. Try to do something else. Try to find similar bugs that are related. And this one is very easily forgotten. So how can we use this? Obviously, for me, who is in the gaming industry, I'm doing this for exploratory testing. But you could use those advice just as well by doing planned testing, creating test cases, specific test cases. So when you're working on a feature, take the advice one by one and write down possible test cases. Are there any extreme values I could enter into the code? What will happen? And this is the bug prevention I'm talking about. This is the main thing I would like you to know. This is why I wanted to be here and talk about this. Because preventing implementation of bugs is really a cheap way of increasing the quality. So a bold statement is like, over 99% of all bug reports have a connection to one or more of these advice. I'm perfectly sure, no matter which project you're talking about, it will have connection to the advice I've just given you. But that does not say if you follow this advice, you will find 99% of the bugs. It's not the case. The problem with this is that there are different interpretations of those advice. There is some human error, and there is something called level of independence, meaning that people that are very close to the code will see and seek different kind of bugs from the people that doesn't know anything about the implementation. They will look for completely different things. That's why you kind of need the both. You kind of need people that are very close to the code that will be looking for bugs, as well as people that does not know anything about the code. Okay, once more. A QA walks into the bar. Once more with feeling. He orders a beer. He orders some food. That would be verification. Use extreme values. He orders 0 beers. He orders 999 beers. He orders a lizard. He orders -1 beers. He orders a... number 3, synergies. Orders beer and food at the same time. Orders a beer at exactly the same time as some other customer. Advice 4, checking the feedback. Check that correct misspelling, has been drawn from the account. Checks that cheesy sticks really contain cheese. Checks that buffalo wings really contains wings of a buffalo. Looks with distrust at White Russian. Next one, avoid the core path. Pauses. Waits a long time and decided to do these tests later. If you remember, these are like the bad idea tests. So we wait with them. 6, misuse the game mechanics. As for a coaster, 15 times in a row, and then places the beer directly on the bar next to his stack of coasters. This is both like avoiding mechanics and overusing mechanics. 7, check the order of operations. Go to the bathroom, dries hands, washes them, and then uses the toilet. Orders a beer, receives it, but then tries to skip the payment part. Number 8, testing the states. When forced to pay, he tries to pay with an empty account, then interrupts the payment in the middle of a transaction. Orders a beer and grabs it while the bartender is still pouring it. Number 9, redundancy. Pays with a card and with cash. Test both men's and women's toilets. Now it's time for final test. Avoid the core path. Orders a beer, shouting from the other end of the bar. Start dancing and singing loudly on the table. Starts a fight with the bouncer. Advice number 1, back again, verification. He wrote a final note in his journal. Getting thrown out from the bar. Test result passed. Heads home with a black eye. A real customer comes in and asks where the toilet is. The bar does not burst into flames. The customer uses the toilet. Nothing extraordinary happens. While sitting on the toilet, she noticed something slightly odd, but also amusing. A poster on the door describing some of the previously used test cases. So this is the final result. Please don't fish in the toilet. Are there any questions, by the way?
Good, thanks. You can have a few questions if there are some. Otherwise, we have the mingle button now and you come directly to Artur. Questions?
Yes, please.
Specifically for the gaming context, which is so user input
Yes.
heavy compared to, I guess, some other contexts. How much of this can you automate?
A whole lot. The problem with the automatization of computer games is that they change a lot. But you can still do automatization for very specific features. From what I've seen, from what I've experienced, it's still possible to do automatization of very small things, like, for example, checking that the correct amount of stuff is being drawn, for example, or if you change the screen resolution, that it won't break, that you will still be able to all the buttons will be there, for example. But when it comes to like a broader testing, it's very difficult. Well, it's still possible, but it's very, very costly. So most companies are not doing that. There are some that are. When it comes to automatization, generally, I would say that puzzle games are the ones that are being optimized in the best way, because then you can optimize one puzzle at a time, just looking at them. So it's possible, but it's difficult. I would put it like this. Yes?
What's about testing on the API level? Because it's always API behind.
Yes, I would say it's absolutely. You can both use this advice, and you could be doing automatization. For example, if you're testing API on a level when you're like extreme values, so if you enter a wrong value into an API, and what kind of feedback will you be getting? So it's absolutely possible. However, it was like at least 20 years ago, I had anything to do with API, so I'm not sure if my advice is still relevant. Right? Any other questions? Well,
Okay, then thanks. And